Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics Monday. I'm Nick Palavito. I'm your moderator for today's program. And we're going to go over some interesting issues that took place during the week. And later on, hopefully, have our special guest who runs the Black Business Network on the Pod TV network. So first of all, let's bring in one of our hosts, the president of the Pod TV network, Kim Calhoun. Welcome to the show. Yep, we're going to be discussing some real major changes that have taken place in the economic world this week. And with that, we have none other than the person who is the former Comptroller General of the United States of America. Let's bring in the Honorable David M. Walker. David, welcome to the show. There's been some major upheavals in the economic market with Republic Bank being taken over by JP Morgan Chase. Tell me, how does that all take place? How does that happen? What happened to First Republic?
Well, they were somewhat of a specialty bank that, like the Silicon Valley Bank, specialized in high net worth individuals and entrepreneurial type companies, if you will. It's my understanding. I will tell you this is the second bank size and consequence in the Federal Reserve District for San Francisco. So something's wrong with the Federal Reserve District of San Francisco, and there needs to be some accountability and possibly some personnel changes as a result of this. As you know, FDIC stepped in and then over the weekend and then cut a deal with JP Morgan Chase, which is now taken over First Republic. And it's interesting. I looked a little bit this morning and saw that Jamie Dimon, who's chairman and CEO of JP Morgan, said, we have a strong and stable financial system, so don't get concerned about this. And then I saw that the chief investment officer of JP Morgan Chase said it ain't over yet. Okay, and so I think one of the things that's going on is that you've had a significant increase in the Fed interest rates. You've also had a significant increase in Treasury rates, and a lot of these banks ended up buying a lot of treasuries, in many cases at the encouragement of the Federal Reserve. And obviously, with interest rates going up, the value of those investments go down. That's how bonds work, unless you're going to hold it to maturity. And what's interesting is there is a way to kind of game the system a little bit by saying if you intend to hold it to maturity, you don't have to write it down on your financial statement. So then really what it comes down to is how much liquidity do you have, right? Do you have the ability to meet depositor demands when they decide that they want to withdraw their money? And it's my understanding that $100 billion was withdrawn from First Republic Bank. So there was clearly a run on that bank, and something had to happen to deal with that. So I don't think we're anywhere close to where we were in 2008, 2009 financial system, but we're not out of the woods yet. And so let's see where we go from here. But I don't think we have the same kind of situation that we had in 8-9.
Okay, well, another big issue that took place during the weekend was the debt ceiling. Apparently, there was some agreement by the House to basically take care of the debt ceiling issue, but it's in front of the Senate. It looks like it's dead on arrival. This Russian roulette that's being played with our economic system, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, first, the House did pass a comprehensive piece of legislation that, among other things, raises the debt ceiling $1.5 trillion but it also has a number of other elements to it, significant spending reductions that end up saving an alleged 4.8 trillion over 10 years. I mean, that's real money, but it's significant. Okay, it proposes a number of cuts between 2023 and 2024, and then it proposes to only allow discretionary spending to increase 1% a year going forward for the next 10 years. All right. So, and the bottom line is that that's not going to pass the Senate. In fact, Chuck Schumer may not even let it get to a vote in the Senate. In addition, Biden has said that even if the bill was sent to him, that he would veto it. I think we have to be pragmatic here. I mean, we got a couple of issues. First, we have to recognize that the bill that was passed by the House does include a debt ceiling increase. And the reason that bill passed was to put pressure on Biden to get to the table and negotiate. But we have two issues that ultimately we have to resolve. We have to resolve the debt ceiling, and then we have to resolve the budget and appropriations process for fiscal 2024, and then potentially beyond. In my personal view, which I've said publicly and I testified before the House Budget Committee 3 weeks ago, both are important, but they ought to be separated. That we ought to deal with we ought to deal with budget appropriations issues as part of the fiscal 2024 budget process, and there ought to be negotiations on that. At the same point in time, the idea that we're going to unconditionally increase the debt ceiling when our financial condition is deteriorated dramatically and when spending is out of control is unrealistic. So I think that what we need to do is separate those two, and that we need to have negotiations now on the debt ceiling. And the kinds of things that we ought to be talking about on the debt ceiling, what I suggested was, rather than dealing with spending levels or appropriations levels, we ought to be dealing with the disease. And the disease is we have a large and growing imbalance between projected spending and projected revenues. Debt GDP is already too high. It's expected to get a lot higher under our current path. So what we need to do as a condition of increasing the debt ceiling is not negotiating over individual spending levels, create a statutory fiscal sustainability commission comprised of capable, credible, and non-conflicted individuals. That by definition means no politicians and no people in organizations that have a clear conflict of interest with regard to what this commission comes up with. The commission would have a year or more to be able to engage the American people through all forms of communication, whether it be social media, television, in-person events, online events, whatever. They would help them understand where we've been, where we are, where we're headed, the fact that we have to make tough choices. That's not optional. We have to. The benefits of acting sooner rather than later, soliciting input on what some of those choices ought to be, and then making a package of recommendations to the Congress that would be guaranteed an up or down vote. The only way that we're going to end up diffusing this ticking bomb is if we engage the American people, we start with the people, and if we set the table with a package of recommendations that will involve tough choices, but trade-offs, so that Congress has cover to make those tough choices. Now, here's what I'm happy about. What I'm happy about, and basically this was part of my testimony before the House Budget Committee 2 weeks ago. The Problem Solvers Caucus, which is supported by No Labels, of which I'm a national co-founder, that's nolabels.org. The Problem Solvers Caucus, which is, I think, 64 members of the House, equally divided between the Republicans and the Democrats, came out about a week ago with a debt ceiling proposal. It is the only bipartisan proposal. It's a 4-point proposal. It basically separates spending from procedural and structural issues, and it includes a recommendation for this fiscal sustainability commission. That's what I call it. I don't know what they're going to call it, but basically it includes that recommendation. So that's the only thing that's out there that's bipartisan, and I think it's a reasonable, logical way to move forward, and hopefully we'll get some traction, and hopefully we can get Biden to the bargaining table because right now the Republicans are the only ones that have done something that directly deals with the debt ceiling. And if it's not acceptable to you, then you need to get to the table and you need to start negotiating.
Yep. We're bringing in Shaquille from overseas because he may have a thought on especially China basically trying to get the yuan to supplant the dollar in international trading. What are your thoughts on that, Shaquille? What's going on overseas?
Well, I just want to respond to a couple of things that Dave said first, if that's okay. So Dave, look, I don't think the situation domestically in America is as bad as 2007-8, but the whole world economic system, it's looking a bit shaky. I read a report the other day, something like 25 or 26 of the top countries in the world have inverted yield curves right now. That's a pretty scary situation, and I think it's indicative of something brewing. Now, I don't know I don't know what that's going to result in, but I think that's a real issue that we really need to be concerned about, because obviously the money markets are a bit spooked. But I wanted to ask you a question. I tried to actually watch your testimony. Right. I was limited in what I could say, and I also was a little bit limited for time. But it just seems to me, and I'm not picking on America. I think this is politics all over the place. It seems to me that people that come up with really good and sensible ideas are normally ignored. And I would be fearful in the United States that Republicans might talk a big game as much as they want to right now, but it's not really in their interests to make sure this situation's fixed. Because if they can, slap Biden around potentially with a default, which I really hope they don't do, slap Biden around, look how bad, your policies were, you weren't prepared to negotiate at all, you said there would be no negotiations. This is just the president and Republicans playing chicken with the economy. It doesn't just affect Americans, it affects the whole world. Do you think that the politicians that sat there and listened to your testimony and listened to your thoughts and suggestions, do you think they're actually going to take it on board and make those changes? Or do you think that this is just the same sort of political theater that many people associate with Washington?
Well, first, I think that the bill that was passed by the House is not going to pass in the Senate, would not be signed by the president, okay? Because it merges two issues. It merges spending with the debt ceiling issue. But it does raise the debt ceiling. That the Senate has not passed anything that raises the debt ceiling, even if it's a clean bill. And frankly, I don't think they could pass it. And the president's done nothing. All right. So you have a situation where the most important thing that we need to do right now is to raise the debt ceiling. But given the current financial condition and the deteriorating fiscal outlook for the country, I think the idea of actually having a condition that doesn't deal with current spending levels and things of that nature, but deals with let's do something that will help us treat the disease, the large and growing imbalance. And so I'm somewhat hopeful, because you may not have been on the call, Shaquille, but the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is
see it.
Right. Okay, good. Well, that's a bipartisan proposal. Okay. And in order for them to come up with that proposal, they had to get 75% support among their caucus, which is bipartisan. So that's the only bipartisan proposal out there. And what they've done is they've separated what I suggested in the hearing, separate the budget and appropriations issues from the debt ceiling issue. We need to deal with both, but let's deal with the debt ceiling, but don't raise it unconditionally. Raise it conditioned on creating a mechanism that can help us get to the disease. All right. And you also know that I'm for, a fiscal sustainability amendment that focuses on debt to GDP. And it would be great if we could get some movement on that as well. But I think it's much more likely that you're going to get movement on some type of a commission, first before you go there. But ultimately, we're going to have to go there.
Well, Dave, if I was American, or if I could bring you to the countries that I'm a citizen of, I'd be one of your biggest supporters. I am one of your biggest supporters, but I love your passion and the sense that you bring to the table. I guess I'm a little disillusioned by politicians and by what they seem to want to do, which is just to try to force through issues based on crises that they actually create. To Nick, to your question, and I'll probably relate this, go back to Dave on this. I'm not actually that concerned about the yuan specifically displacing the US dollar. What I'm concerned about, especially because they have currency controls, what I am concerned about though is the reduction in trade denominated in US dollars, because it has a flow-on effect to everybody. But I think it's inevitable. And, to be fair, I think there's a lot of countries that will say, well, why do we need to trade with the United States? Or why do we need to use US dollars in the first place? If Australia wants to do something with Samoa, for example, what possible reason is there for Australia to cross its currency into the US dollar? And we're your ally, right? So I think you're going to see, a bit of a push. And then people have been talking about this for a long time, for the US not to necessarily be the sole reserve currency. But my concern is I don't really hear anybody in mass media, and I don't hear any mainstream politicians ever talking about this issue, other than maybe Republicans on Fox, briefly sort of complaining about it. But what my concern is I don't think that the politicians are actually dealing with it. And much like we talk about, Dave, when you say, look, the Social Security trust fund's going to run out of money, and what are we going to do in 2028? When exactly are politicians going to take proper preemptive action to deal with issues that are clearly foreseeable, and the world relying on the US dollar less is a clearly foreseeable issue that's going to come up?
Well, Macron is dealing with it right now in Paris, France, by raising the retirement age to the great age of 64. But notice what's happening in Paris, France.
Yeah, there's strikes.
There's strikes. There's riots. I mean, it's turned into mayhem. I think what you're seeing is how America plans on solving its Social Security and Medicare crisis. That what will happen is once they run out of money, then they're going to announce to the American public, we're run out of money.
Yeah, let me jump in here.
Yeah, I figured you should jump in on that one.
You need to recognize that a vast majority of politicians and a vast majority of our media are lag indicators. Mm-hmm. They're not leaders, they're laggards. Right. They are focusing on things based upon things that happen and reacting to the things that happen, rather than looking ahead and trying to take affirmative steps to deal with, to capitalize on opportunities and mitigate risk. All right. And the perfect example of that is the nation's finances, the changing alliances in the world wanting to move away from the dollar. I don't think we're ever going to lose reserve currency status. I do think we're going to lose market share with regard to trade and with regard to reserve currency. And that has an implication, okay, on cost of capital, on the advantages we have on trade, on the ability to impose sanctions, et cetera. I think that's real. And as you know, Shaquille, that's in the book. It's in the book. Let me give an example. Of demagoguery on Social Security. As you know, I used to be a trustee of Social Security and Medicare. The latest report that came out says that Social Security trust fund goes to zero in 2034. Well, they'll never allow that to happen, because if that happens, tens of millions of Americans will have their checks cut by 20+%, at least 20% immediately across the board, right? So my argument is, you've already got Biden and Trump have come out saying, I'm not going to touch Social Security. So my reaction to that is, okay, you're for a 20% plus cut in Social Security benefits. Maybe down the road, but that's what you're for, because if you do nothing, that's what happens. And by the way, in 1983, the last time we reformed Social Security, it was within weeks of the trust fund going to zero. That would not be equitable. It would not be politically feasible. So they acted because they had to act. But again, it comes back to where I started. Most politicians are laggards, not leaders. And most of the news is reacting to things that have happened, rather than people to look ahead and anticipate and take and take actions in advance to either capitalize on opportunities and or mitigate risk. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hey, David, I got a quick question for you. And it's actually based on an event that was going on last week and everything. And it's something that I learned that actually somewhat startled me. And I'd love to hear your thoughts around it and all in that space. Because, there is other newer currencies that are out there, that whole crypto world and all in that space. And it seems to me that there are certain parts of society that might be falling into the notion of what used to be called fool's gold and all in that space. Because what I have learned, and I did not know until recently, is that the percentage, and Shaquille's going to love this one because it's me actually bringing negative light to the minority community, but the percentage of folks that are minorities that are getting involved in cryptocurrency are actually much greater than the population and all in that space. So I just wanted your thoughts around that. Is that something that those communities need to be worried about? Because apparently that is a part of the society that is flocking to crypto.
Same thing with regard to the lottery, isn't it, Mark?
Yep.
Is it their disproportionate participation in the lottery by minority communities?
Yes, there is.
Yeah. I mean, what I will tell you that when it gets to be $1 billion, I buy a lotto ticket. But if it doesn't get to be $1 billion, I don't buy a lotto ticket because I know what the odds are. Same thing for Vegas. I don't bet in Vegas because I know how they were able to build those billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. The house has an advantage. But let me, Shaquille,
Well, I'm somebody who's I think now on my 14th life ban from the casinos, so I can tell you they're beatable, but most people are not going to beat them. Look, I'll just say, I think you're right. You're not going to lose reserve status as such, but look, when the euro really became a thing, that in part displaced US dollar. Right. And for obvious reasons, because people in that region are obviously going to cross the currency with the euro instead of the US. The BRICS nations, we can be concerned about what they're going to do, but at the end of the day, they are doing what I think is in their best interest, which is logical. I've long said that the Belt and Road Initiative from China is a really good idea for China, and the way that we should respond to that is not to attack China. The way that we could respond to that is to say, look, we're going to open ourselves up to trade as well. Let's build a Belt and Road Initiative ourselves. And that's not something that should just be the United States. The Five Eyes countries more than anybody. The Five Eyes countries should be in charge of rolling that out and increasing trade. There's some competing interests. Donald Trump, for example, talks about, is a populist, talks about bringing manufacturing back to the United States. But if you do that, of course, are you not going to buy from those poorer countries because that's their only way to improve their lot in life? So, these issues get complicated very quickly. When it comes to crypto, Mark, I think I understand why minority communities and lots of people are attracted to cryptos because, it's the libertarian ideal. You don't have to deal with government, etc. I have some concerns about the stability of crypto, but more importantly, I'm actually very concerned about the push by many governments around the world to introduce government fiat cryptocurrency. And one of the reasons I'm concerned about is not actually just about the government doing it. It's what sort of control does that give government? Does that mean that if the government thinks that I drink too much, they can then say, well, we're going to turn off your digital currency so you can't buy more than the amount of alcohol that we think's okay, or more than the amount of cigarettes that we think that's okay, or more than the amount of chocolate bars than we think's okay? I don't want government to have that sort of power. And the response I often hear from people is, well, there'll be rules against government doing that. But if there's a rule, it means the rule can be broken. And as many of us, and I think many people who aren't into politics experienced during COVID, a lot of people don't realize how much power the government has and what they can do if they deem something to be an emergency. We saw in Cyprus that they did a bail-in with their banks. What is to stop the United States federal government? And I know there might be some constitutional reasons against this, but what's to stop the United States federal government from simply saying, okay, look, the finance sector's in peril, we're just going to do a bail-in with your digital currency. Or Social Security is running out of money, we're just going to do a bail-in. These sorts of things
But Shaquille,
lessen the amount of trust that people have in these institutions.
Shaquille, that's part of what I'm hearing is that, and I don't know, Dave would know better than I would because he's been involved in that part of the government. But it is my understanding that there are forces within the U.S. government that are literally looking at a U.S. digital coin, and I don't know how I feel about that, but that is what I'm hearing. That they are literally
That's exactly the point. But that's exactly the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
So that would mean that somebody could turn on or turn off. The government could turn on or turn off your money, or could create and delete it. Just, if you're, I mean, look what happened. Look what happened up in Canada, for example, with the truckers, right? Prime Minister Trudeau froze everyone's bank accounts. What if he had the ability to just penalize people involved in that by reducing the amount of digital currency that they held? I mean, the amount of power that you'd be handing to government, I really think, especially for the United States, which is a country founded on the belief that you shouldn't trust government and you should limit its power, giving government the ability to issue digital currency, I think, gives government an enormous amount of power that they shouldn't have.
From a personal standpoint, I'm strongly against a digital currency issued by the government. There's two dimensions. One dimension is, do you want government to know everything you're doing?
Right.
I mean, to the extent that it involves exchange for value, I mean, they would know everything, right? Okay. But secondly, it also would give them the ability to be able to turn on or turn off or otherwise control what you're doing. And if anything, government's already gone beyond where there should be. All right.
When we're talking about the government, David, what incentivizes the media and politicians to stay away from the Social Security Trust Fund going to zero? They stay away from the issue of Medicare coming insolvent. Why is this removed from the table when it should be number one on the table between the media and our politicians? Why is it that they will not discuss these issues, David?
Several reasons. Number one, because they're laggards rather than leaders. Okay. Number two, because of the thinking that they're the third rail of politics, that they're so popular that you can't touch them or else you might not be able to be reelected. Thirdly, because you have both of the political parties try to demagogue on it. I don't know if you've seen some of the ads where Trump has got ads attacking DeSantis, saying he voted 3 times to cut security. All right, and we have 3 maladies with regard to politics: myopia, which is short-sightedness. Okay, tunnel vision, just looking at one issue at a time without understanding the collateral impact, the domino effects. You make a change here, it's going to have an impact elsewhere. And thirdly, self-interest. And self-interest for politicians is they want to keep their job, right? So the combination of short-sightedness, tunnel vision, self-interest is this, all right? Which means you don't end up addressing large known and growing problems until you reach crisis proportions. And then when you reach crisis proportions, that gives you cover to act. But many times you act without adequate due diligence, without adequate controls, and you don't actually solve the problem, okay? And for Social Security, the next time that we go at it, and we ought to go at it much sooner rather than later, is we need to consider demographics. The last time that they reformed Social Security, they did not adequately consider demographics. The fact that we're having fewer and fewer workers support a growing elderly population, all right? When I was born in 1951, there were 16 people working for every person drawing Social Security. Today, it's a little bit less than 3 to 1. And within 10 years, it's going to be about 2 to 1. Well, demographics are destiny. Run the numbers on that. Okay. I mean,
well, why is
can I just say a couple of things? I'll just add a couple of things to Dave's answer, if that's all right. Also, I think it's easier for the media to distract people by things that aren't really that important. The trans issues, Dylan Mulvaney being on Bud Light has been a huge story. Tucker Carlson and Dom Lemon leaving Fox and CNN, massive big stories. Does this really impact people's lives?
No.
But so it's easier to talk about those sorts of things. But another important issue, I think, is if Dave, for example, was setting up a company and he said, or was running some sort of agency and said, Shaquille, I really like your opinions and your insight on things. I'd like you to be an advisor to us. That wouldn't give me the ability to go and just do whatever I wanted. That would only give me the ability to give him my opinion and for him to judge that opinion and decide what parts of it he likes and what parts he's going to disregard. But the politicians, and again, this is not just in America, the politicians are rarely writing the bills themselves. They're rarely even meeting with lobbyists other than at those, state dinners and things like that. But all their minions are, all the people that work there, the staffers, they're the ones that are actually making all these decisions, and we don't know what their names are. These people are just going around doing all this stuff, and so, they're just responding to what they're hearing, what their staffers are telling them. This is in my view, this is not how government should be operating.
But why isn't
Shaquille,
why isn't the fourth estate, which is the media, why are they being complicit in the area of not addressing the three major problems that we have economically, which is Social Security going broke, Medicare going broke, and the United States being broke? Why is it that the media ignores this area? When their duty and responsibility to disclose these facts to the American public, since the politicians won't do it?
Because much of the media has become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. Much of the media has become ideological and partisan. When you look on television, what I expect to get and what we don't get is, give me the facts, all right? And then if you want to give me your opinion, that's okay. But ideally, what I'd like is the facts. And then I'd like you to have a panel of people with different opinions and comments based upon the facts. But everybody shouldn't be allowed to have their own facts, right? Or you shouldn't be allowed to, I'm only going to talk about the positives. I'm not going to mention the negatives. Or I'm only going to talk about the negatives and I'm not going to talk about the positives, right? The lack of contextual sophistication. So the media is part of the problem. The media is not educating. I talk about there's too many fact-free zones. I mean, it's all opinion, okay? And so, the media needs major reforms as well. But then the media has economic considerations too, right? The media is turned into be more entertainment rather than education. I mean, it's about ratings and it's about getting advertising. And by the way, who's the biggest advertiser for television? What segment of the economy is the biggest advertiser for television?
Is it the drug companies?
The drug
companies, right? And we're the only major industrialized nation that allows drug companies to advertise on TV. And it shouldn't.
No. Other countries like Australia do allow them to, but not to the extent, not to the extent that you do in America. And I have to tell you, when I'm in the United States and I watch your ads, and I always get a chuckle because they're also required to tell you what can go wrong. So it's like, hey, did you stub your toe? Well, we've got this pill that you can take that will lessen the pain when you stub your toe. And then right at the end of the ad, where they have all these people that are really happy and skipping around the park. And then right at the end of the ad, it's like, taking this pill can cause permanent blindness. You can have a heart attack and a stroke. And you sit there going, look, the pill is going to be worse for me than the pain of stubbing my toe. But I do want to just say to you, Dave, I think that one of the concerns with media and with, it being an entertainment type of environment is that I know when people ask me what I actually do for a living, everyday people that I meet, it's really hard for me to explain what I do. And then when I try to explain it to them, their eyes glaze over. And, more locally, I'll have people that say, well, who cares what happens in America? What does it have to do with our economy? I'm like, well, America is one of the largest, or is the largest economy in the world. So when something happens over there, it affects all of us. And they'll have people go, well, that's ridiculous. That shouldn't happen. We should change that. And it's like, you don't understand how the economy works. So I think there's a real lack of knowledge, experience, education in these areas. And who wants to talk about finance? Who wants to talk about interest rates? Who wants to talk about all these issues? You made a suggestion a couple of months ago about perhaps raising the age of retirement and, potentially reducing benefits. And I quipped back at you and said, "You boomers, you've had this dream run through life and you're making us, go through all of this." But to be fair, in part, that's kind of a default. There's a generation of people that has paid into a system based on a certain promise, and that promise is being broken. Now, I do actually agree with you. I actually think that's probably the only feasible solution. But on the same token, why should people be required to pay, or it's payroll tax half paid by their employer, to pay into a system where the government decides how that money is invested? We trust insurance companies. We trust pension fund companies, superannuation fund companies in Australia, for example. All over the world, these sorts of companies invest money on behalf of the people who are putting their retirement savings into them. Maybe it's time for a more free market solution. Maybe some people should be able to opt out of the social security system and be able to choose insurance contracts, be able to choose, long-term investment products and things like that, and hold those companies to account if they don't perform. Maybe that's a better solution.
Shaquille, but isn't that part of the problem? And I'd love to hear Dave's thoughts about what I'm going to bring in, because I hear what he's saying. And I know we've got the media show coming up and everything, but it seems to me that part of what happened is that there isn't really a true established media the way it used to be, because I do remember the days of Walter Cronkite and a number of the other folks that used to do that more traditional kind of media. It's part of the reason that I got into journalism and all in that space. But right now it is a group of thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not millions, citizen journalists, because that is what basically Clubhouse and a number of other things are, and some very corporate media types as well, because a lot of the media is very corporate dominated in terms of big media. So it's like big media and a series of citizen journalists that are all over the place in terms of their politics. I don't know that
Mark, can I just point something out? And I do want to get David's response both to my comments and yours, but can I just point something out here, just to use one example? Milton Friedman brought out the Free to Choose books and then brought out a 10-part series, and that was, I believe, in the late 60s or early 70s. It's still available on YouTube. Media was more responsive and was more able to bring people together, and Free to Choose really proved that, where they were bringing people together from various political views and discussing the issues. Milton Friedman talked about Social Security and actually said that exactly the issue we're having right now was going to happen. So even with a more honest or more balanced and fair media, these problems still happened. And I believe it's because of the aloofness and apathy of the public and the lack of care and leadership by politicians.
No, I don't agree with you on that.
Let me jump in if I can. First, you got to keep in mind, back when I was younger, okay, before the internet, before cable television, there were 3 major networks.
Exactly.
Right, and they were only on for like a half hour at night. All right. Yep. The national news was on for a half hour, and then you got to decide who did you trust to get your news from. Mm-hmm. And clearly the winner during the 60s was Walter Cronkite.
Right.
And in fact, CBS News, and if you recall, when Walter Cronkite came out against the Vietnam War in some of his language, all right, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was the president at the time, said, "If I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost the nation." All right. The truth is, now we have many, many different media outlets. Okay. In addition to that, it's much more entertainment than it is news. In addition, it's 24/7. All right. Plus people self-select which channel they're going to go to in order to get their information, which tends to be either to the right or the left of what I call the sensible center. There are outlets I look at more than others, but I do try to go and look at different outlets to see how they present the same issue. And it's shocking how they present. Now, several things. First, one of the things that's different is people are living a lot longer. Mm-hmm. So when Social Security was created, people weren't living as long, right? And so the system was set up to be able to support people for a certain number of years in retirement. Now those years are a lot longer, right? So that's one of the issues you got to deal with. Secondly, on the investment side, the only thing right now that Social Security is allowed to invest in is U.S. Treasuries or securities backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. Now, there is a senator, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, who is proposing to change that and to allow for different kinds of investments, including stocks and bonds and things of that nature, as part of the solution, if you will. So that's on the table. But we have to keep in mind that Social Security is a social insurance program. Believe it or not, while it was not intended to be this way, over 50% of the people who draw Social Security benefits, that is overwhelmingly their primary form of retirement income. Because we were supposed to have Social Security, private pensions, which includes DB and DC, personal savings, but most people don't have it. Okay, and so one of the elements of Social Security reform is not only to try to gradually increase the normal retirement age over a number of years in the future, which we've already done once. Okay, we've gone from 65 to 67. We did that in 1983, given longer lifespans. But also to have a supplemental individual account, a supplemental savings account where individuals would be able to control the money. It's in their name. They can invest it, in a number of different investment options, similar to what we call the Federal Thrift Savings Plan, which is the largest 401k defined contribution plan in the world. It's for federal government workers and retirees. So, but keep in mind, last thing on this, George Walker Bush, 43, the younger Bush who was president. He and Dick Cheney wanted to reform Social Security, and they wanted to convert it from a defined benefit to a defined contribution arrangement. And the popularity for their proposed approach was less after doing a number of public events than before they started. And why is that? The reason being is because they forgot the second word in Social Security. It's not opportunity, it's security.
Dave, let me just say a couple of things there. Of course, defined contribution. The problem is that the majority of people are not wealthy, and so wealthier people would benefit from it more. But I think there's something to be said for if a government-run program is allowed to invest in stocks, etc., and those investments don't work out, who do I'm not American, but if I was, who do I hold accountable for that? Why shouldn't I be able to choose, a hedge fund manager or, a banker or, whoever, my stockbroker or whatever, under even government-defined rules? One of the issues that I see with the proposal that's happening in the United States, and it's a similar issue to what we're experiencing in Australia, except we have superannuation instead of Social Security. One of the issues that I see there is, and I'm not trying to pick on the boomers as I often do, but the boomers had a pretty good run. They generally had less children than their parents. Okay, those children are Gen Xers and millennials generally. We're going to fix this problem for right now to try to make sure that people, as they grow older, have got enough money to be able to survive. But millennials and Gen Zs are not getting married as much as they used to. Birth rates have dropped substantially. What are they going to do? I'm almost 40. So in 25 or 27, or if the age goes up in 30 years' time when I'm 70, who am I going to rely on? I don't have any children at all. I hope God blesses me with them one day, but I don't have any children at all. And many people in my age don't. They want them, but they just, for whatever reason, haven't had them. So who do we rely on? What's our program? Wow. And I personally think that if I'm forced to contribute to a government program that may or may not be solvent later on, surely I should have the choice to be able to invest those funds, which are being invested supposedly on my behalf, where I want to see them invested, as opposed to where government says they should go.
Well, the U.S. has an advantage that many other countries don't have, and that is immigration. People from all over the world want to come to the United States. And we have a real border security problem now, and we need comprehensive immigration reform. But you're right, Shaquille, that the average number of children that my generation had was less than the average number from the generation prior to that. And the average number for my kids' generation is going to be less than my generation. And demographics are destiny. And the way you have to make that up is through immigration. Okay. But we need to dramatically reform our immigration policy to recognize that we're in a global Olympics, and that right now we have a very low unemployment rate, even though we've only got 1.1% GDP growth. But the problem is we have a skills gap. We have a huge gap between what we need and what's available. And that's because we need to reform our immigration system. We need to reform our education system. We need to reform our training system, and do a number of things in order to gain a better match. But we do have an advantage that other countries don't have, and that is people want to come here. And
well, Dave, if I can say, when it comes to immigration, Australia, people want to move to Australia. We're a very desirable country. New Zealand is, Canada is, the UK is. So the United States is not totally unique.
no, it's not the only one.
In raw numbers, you guys bring more people in. But let's talk about immigration for a moment. One of the reasons that people are deferring getting married, and certainly when I was in my 20s, when I wanted to have children in my mid to late 20s, I was afraid I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford to buy a house. I wanted to have a house. I wanted to have some stability. I wanted to have a backyard for the kids to play in. I was worried that I just couldn't afford it. And what we're seeing now is some of the solutions that make sense. When people talk about immigration reform in the United States, especially on the right, they talk about, we want skilled workers. We want the best of the best. But if you only bring in skilled workers, and if you have mass immigration anyway, that drives up the price of housing. That lessens the job opportunities that are available. And it makes it even harder for the next generation down to actually get ahead. Now, I'm certainly not against immigration. My mother immigrated to Australia. I'm very grateful that she did. And the opportunities that I've had have been fantastic. But, the idea that all these sorts of solutions are going to be solutions for the current generation that's aging through the system into retirement now doesn't really address what we're going to do in 20 or 30 years. And I'm fearful that what the politicians are going to do when push comes to shove is to kick the can down the road for another generation to have to deal with. And I think just from a general, point of fairness, I think our generation is not getting the same opportunities as the generation before us.
Well, as I told you that most politicians are laggards rather than leaders, and they're not looking ahead. They're not seeing the trends, the challenges, the opportunities, taking affirmative steps. But understand, when I say immigration, I mean comprehensive. Comprehensive means temporary work permits. It means pathway to legal status. It means pathway to citizenship. It means relooking at the base, how many and the type of people that you want. So, I'm talking about comprehensive. I'm not just talking about one little piece, if you will. But you also have to secure the border. We clearly don't have a secure border right now, and that's causing issues, if you will.
And I want to add something to that. I think that the Social Security funds did get a little bit misused over the years, and we did fund a lot of students with Social Security who came over from other countries, and their parents never paid into it, nor did they pay into it after they graduated and either returned home or stayed in this country and took our jobs away from us. So I personally think that, David's right. We need to nail down a little bit of some of the immigration issues. But I truly believe that our Social Security funds were misappropriated to people who never paid into the system to begin with. And we need to get a handle on that.
While we're getting a handle on that, can we get a handle on some of the corporations as well? Because they're part of the problem that exists is if we're talking about skilled labor versus non-skilled labor. Yeah, there are a lot of doctors and engineers that come in and get that training and then go back to their country as to what you're referring to.
Exactly.
And there are also a lot of folks that get jobs that are considered manual labor or construction kind of labor, and the corporations know that some of those folks are illegal or that they are not, but it is serving them in their best interest to keep them in that environment. So it's like a form of indentured.
But let's say on
And
that
our
point,
students, the Americans who paid our taxes, our kids have a huge student debt to pay, while other kids got it for free from other countries, and they could take our jobs away from us because they could work for less.
Keep in
So I
mind,
agree with you.
on that point,
you
Ken,
have to
sorry,
pay 10 years. Pardon me 1 second, Shaquille. I'll come right to you. Just to clarify a point. You have to pay into Social Security for 10 years before you're eligible for benefits.
Right.
10 years. Right. Okay.
Just on that point, though, in relation to foreigners, I think I've made it very clear over the years that I absolutely love and adore and mostly respect the United States. I really do. If somebody was to say to me, "Hey, I can wave a magic wand right now and give you American citizenship," I would be hesitant. I would be really hesitant. And the primary reason why is because it would complicate my tax situation immensely. And there again is an unfairness within the US system, which I'm really surprised isn't talked about more. And that is, if I go and purchase property in the United States, which there's no restriction on, and I don't even need to have anything other than a visitor visa to do it, if I purchase property in the United States and I make a profit, or even if I'm running a business or I'm the shareholder or the owner of a business in the United States and I'm making a profit, I'm not going to be taxed the same way as an American citizen would. So based on that, why would I become a citizen? Why would I want to have a green card? We've talked about this before backstage. For me personally, a business visa into the United States is the best possible thing I could get, because it would allow me to pay taxes in America on my US source income and leave the rest of my income alone. And if I have a closer connection exemption to another country, I'm going to be exempt from US taxes on things like capital gains. So when American governments talk about increasing taxes on the rich or increasing taxes on people for whatever the reasons are, to fund Social Security or to do anything else, because your country is so open, as I think it should be, to foreign investment, what you're actually doing is you're disadvantaging Americans and favoring foreigners, and foreigners that aren't hostile, foreigners like myself that are coming from allied countries. We get to benefit from the complexity of your system because you guys have to actually put up with your system and try to navigate it, and we don't. That's not a tenable situation. And I think that on a wider scale, when September 11 happened, Michael Moore made a documentary where he talked about the Saudi owning 8% of the United States. How much of the United States is owned by the Chinese right now?
Hey,
There's
Shaquille,
so much foreign interest
second.
in the United States.
Hold on 1 second. I just wanted to bring in Dr. Kelly. He may have some thoughts around this, since he is definitely very much involved in the economic space, the founder of the Black Business Olympics, and all in that kind of way. And one of the things I was going to ask David before Dr. Kelly joined is, how much do our kids not understand economics? But Dr. Kelly may have some thoughts around that as well, since I know part of what he's trying to do is make sure that our kids have the supplies, as well as make sure that they are informed about economics, particularly within the minority community. Dr. Kelly, I turn it over to you.
Yeah, and unmute yourself, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you very much. First of all, I know this has got to be one of those meetings that I need to be in at 11 o'clock. This morning, I just finished the Black Business Olympics, which was 7 days of intense business owners all over the globe, which was very successful. And this morning, I double booked. I got the email from Nick, but I double booked and was in a meeting this morning with my board and a couple of other boards across the country. And I did want to make it. I didn't hear much of what was going on, but when you begin to talk about economics, I do have a space that I play in, but I want to hear more so that I can understand where the dialogue is going. And I don't want to keep you guys. I know y'all have been going on since 11 o'clock.
Well, I think, Nick, what we ought to do is try to bring Dr. Kelly back on at some point. One of the things that we've talked about in the past, Dr. Kelly, is, we're a great country, but our K through 12 education system is not top 25 in the world. And there's only 14 states out of 50 states that require financial literacy and civic responsibility courses in high school. And I think that's part of the reason that we're so dysfunctional is people don't know how to handle their finances. You don't want to look to government as an example of how to handle it. And they don't understand what their responsibilities are as a citizen of this great republic. And so maybe what we can do is have a separate session where we talk about economics and the need to try to be able to deal with our education and training system, throughout, including the minority communities.
And along those same lines, I know that one of the things that Shaquille has pushed back on me at, and you might have a quick answer for him, is he sometimes wonder why in this particular date and time we need to still have economic factors that are addressing the minority community. But I'll let you.
Mark. Sorry, that. Hang on a second.
I'll let you.
That's a mischaracterization of what I've said. And if we're going to discuss that with Dr. Kelly, then I think that's probably for another show, because I do have some potent points on that. And the way that you've just described it, it's as though I just dislike any kind of of incentive for minorities. I mean, which is patently absurd. But Dave, I just wanted to ask you though, can you just respond to my comments about the potentially preferential treatment that foreigners such as myself might get in the United States? And by the way, this is reciprocated. Americans investing into Australia get certain benefits that Australians wouldn't get because of the complexity of our laws. But we're talking mostly about the United States here. Do you think that that's an issue? Because to me, I often, I know I course of my friends, I'm like, it's as though the US taxpayer is subsidizing what I want to do. Like, why wouldn't I take this?
I think it's an issue, but I think we're out of time.
I would agree. We're out of time, unfortunately. We would like to thank our viewers around the world and thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And what we're going to do is get a future session, because I know that Dr. Kelly is running the Black Business Expo around the whole world, and we'll get a future session with him. But we want to thank our viewers, and we'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Take care. Bye-bye.